Hi, in today's video I'm going to show you how to answer Blue Origin's favorite interview questions, and as you'll see next, it's not rocket science, both predicting and answering these questions if you know how to look at them. Most commonly asked question there would be, tell me about yourself. Okay, so it goes without saying, this is the most commonly asked question in pretty much any job interview today. Now, if I have to give you an advice just briefly on this, the first thing you should understand is that there's a huge trend in preparing job interviews nowadays that of using AI. And what most people will do here would be to reward their elevator pitch using AI because it makes them think that they would look better in a job interview. This is a highly inefficient approach, and I've even had candidates who intentionally try to look scrappy in their tell me about yourself, just in a bit to sound more genuine, okay? Because what happens, me, for example, as a skilled interviewer would immediately spot if you rewarded your answers using AI. Okay, so the moment I do this, I would spot you as a potentially dishonest person. Okay, and that's when things go fishy, as you would expect. So my advice would be to keep it yourself, to keep it your true language. Okay, and the other piece of advice when it comes to tell me about yourself and throughout your interview would be to follow the lead of your interviewer. Okay, so what happens in a normal interviewing session, chances are your interviewer will also introduce themselves. Okay, and if they introduce themselves briefly, then you should also consider following their lead to also keep your tell me about yourself brief, concise, to the point. Okay. Second interview question I want to talk about here would be, tell me about the time when you failed. Okay, so the reason why I'm suggesting that you take these interview questions seriously and so early on in your interview prep is because this is one of the more complex ones to answer, and if you manage to answer this one well, then you will go a lot faster throughout your interview prep. Now, what is to know about this? Tell me about time when you failed. The best failures are the ones from which you learn a lot. Okay, and as you can imagine, learnings mean very different things to different types of roles. You know, learning for an accountant would be entirely different from a learning that of a solution architect or an AI scientist or an engineering role, if you want to call it so, right? Also, very important advice here would be you should structure your failure stories in the STAR format. Situation, task, and action would present the actual failure, and then the results would be the learnings. Half of your story should be the learnings. So if you manage to develop more on the learnings, that's when you score the best points for the purpose of selling yourself on failure stories in job interviews, right? Question number 3. Describe a time when you refused to compromise your standards around quality, customer service, okay, and who was your customer and what was the result. All right, so now we're getting into the more standard interview question, more specific interview questions to Blue Origin, that questions which are also linked to their leadership principles. Okay, and if there's one leadership principle you could think of here, time you refuse to compromise your standards, that would be insist on the highest standards. Okay, so this is a pretty easy one to spot, but still, you know, it also mentions customer service, so you might also be inclined to say maybe it's customer obsession. Still, the idea is to show high standards here, and the way you'd pitch these high standards would be, of course, through a STAR story of a previous experience of a time when you pushed towards high standards. And notice here I didn't say that you focus on a refuse to compromise, but on high standards. Okay, so think about of all the times that they exhibited incredibly high standards when there was a bit of friction, and chances are, you know, there was a compromise there that you didn't take lightly, right? So notice how I'm focusing on showcasing the core behavior in the story rather than nitpicking, you know, on the compromise part. Okay. Question number 4. Tell me about the time when you sacrificed short-term gains for the long-term success of your business or department. Okay, so if you hear this for the first time, chances are you will get a little bit confused as to why would someone ask you this in a job interview. So that's why if you'll go through as many of these questions as possible, I even use quizzes in my training programs to to improve your chances to spot the leadership principle from the question you're asked, you'll know that this refers to the leadership principle of ownership. Okay, so short-term gains for the long-term success of the business. Ownership. Okay, so can you think of a story when you exhibited ownership because you focused long-term versus short-term? I'm sure it's straightforward for most people, once you know why the question gets asked. Okay, still in the star format, and that's how it goes. Question number 5 here. Why Blue Origin? Okay, so this is probably the second most commonly asked question in job interviews. Why do you want to work here? And to give you a little bit of advice, a bit of insight from someone who's hearing answers on this every day, what most people do here would be to compliment and over-compliment the company, the potential employer, on the reasoning, hey, it cannot hurt if you compliment your employer, right? Now, the challenge is that the candidates who pass interviews are not always the ones that try to fit into the role that they're applying for, but rather try to differentiate themselves from other candidates. So if this would be your approach as well, you would try to find something slightly different. Now, of course, you could start by complimenting them, but you could even go in the totally opposite direction to that of most candidates, in the sense that, hey, I'm not sure I want to join you as of yet. I'm just here to learn more about the opportunity and to see if the type of experience I have would be mutually beneficial for the type of work we're doing. Okay, so try to find something interesting here. All right, question number 6. Tell me about the time when a product or service or solution was already receiving good customer feedback, but you decided to do more. Okay, so this is a trick question, by the way, but let's start by reasoning a little bit as to why someone would ask you this question. Which leadership principle or what's the behavior that they're interested in? If they ask you about the time when a product or solution was already receiving good customer feedback, but you decided to improve it further. Okay, most of the time, most candidates, I've even made another separate YouTube videos about this, like 75% of people would answer this question with a solution that was didn't really work well, but they choose to improve it, so their customers would eventually become delighted. The other 25% of candidates would answer such questions when they had a working product, service, or solution which was already exceptionally good, but they went one step further. Maybe you looked around the corner and found out something that your customer didn't even know was a thing. Okay, so the reason why someone would ask you this question would be standards, high standards. Are you someone with high standards? Because if your standards are low, you would think about fixing bugs. If your standards are high, you would think about looking around the corner for customer success. Okay, for what could make a difference here, what could be something even further, right? So the leadership principle involved would be insist on the highest standards. And you'll notice is the second time I'm speaking about insisting on the high standards and showing as someone with high standards in these job interviews, because this is what it sells well. Okay, question number 7. Do you prefer working alone or in a team? Okay, so I'm sure that many of you would say, both, depending on the situation, but you should understand that this refers to the leadership principle Team Blue. Okay, so working in teams. So you should try to pitch this one way or another by how you made a difference while working in a team. And most of the time, this would be showcased through stories of a time when you added some benefit through some friction. It's not as if you can work hardest, but that probably won't sell yourself as being the best team player, right? So you can maybe talk about the time when you helped a colleague to achieve something, or maybe when you had a productive conversation with someone over something, during a conflict, if you want a functional conflict, that eventually improved the team's success and all sorts of these things. But what you should understand is that working in a team is far more important than most people realize when applying for job interviews with Blue Origin. And to give an example, a counterexample, Amazon as a huge company does not have a principle specific to working in teams. Blue Origin does have, so that's why it's a good idea to think what are your best stories to showcase this behavior. Question number 8 here. What's your most recent invention? Okay, so it's a straightforward question to understand, but if you look a little bit between the lines on types of, hey, invention, the most recent, probably you learned something interesting yesterday, but it might not be the most relevant thing for the job interview or for the job description that you're applying for. Okay, so you could also reframe this, what is your most recent invention, with what's the best invention you have to share for me during this interview. Okay, so if you prepare stories, which by the way you can also prepare for free on my website if you want, you will find the best path to sell yourself on this invention. Now of course the most recent invention doesn't have to be the most recent, but you wouldn't want to pick an invention which you did 20 years ago, right? To go completely opposite here. But still, I believe once you understand the question, once you look over it in advance, it will become a piece of cake for you to score well on this one during job interviews, of course in the STAR format. Right? Question number 9. Tell me about the time when you laid out a vision when there wasn't one. Okay, so your vision and strategic thinking. And here, there isn't a specific principle I would link this question to, but still I found this question to be asked in a good number of interviews, because they want to see how you think, what's your vision, how you think about achieving stuff, especially for PM roles, product managers there, and senior roles in particular, even accountants, even senior accountants if you want, they must have a vision over working there, about showcasing their subject matter expertise, about leading teams even, but your vision around something, about achieving something successful, it makes sense even for an engineer, when you achieve something because you had a vision or something. That's something that I would always prepare for these job interviews, at least one story, but again in the STAR format. Question number 10 here. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Okay, so this is not a question linked to any of their leadership principles, but an HR question. Okay, an HR question which takes many people by surprise, because if you hear it for the first time, you wouldn't really know how to go around this. Now, to give you a bit of help here, you could go on the lines of, hey, on whether your intention is to pursue an individual contributor or a manager level role. Okay, or what I also recommend people would be to pitch this behaviorally. Like, based on my previous experience of doing this and this, I could see myself in 5 years doing this and that. Okay, so I would always encourage you to pitch this behaviorally. But in HR interviews, you can expect these types of questions. It's forward-looking, but notice it can be answered behaviorally if you choose so. Now, question number 11. Tell me about the time when you had to handle a conflict with a colleague, peer, manager, cross-functionally, whatever. But questions around handling conflict will get engineers stuck the most. And what you should understand, the leadership principle involved in handling conflict would be earn trust. Okay, and the moment you understand it's about earning other people's trust, you would form an impression as to how can your answers look like to be the most efficient. Okay, and starting from trust, you can categorize. I mean, the way you pitch conflict going into a job interview would be through a functional experience, right? To a subject matter expertise topic, rather than a time when someone hated you. That's a non-functional conflict. So a functional conflict would showcase your, maybe one time you choose to prove your point over your functional expertise using data, by gathering data and by gathering information over something, and you earn the other person's trust. And this is how the conflict was resolved. Okay, so if you frame this in a STAR format, then it all starts making sense. But earn trust is something that will get a good number of candidates stuck. And by the way, please stay away from taking someone else's stories or asking AI for help in rewarding your story, because it must be your genuine self, and you're not supposed to be an expert in conflict resolution going into job interviews with Blue Origin, except if you're going for people manager level roles, okay, so to speak. All right, so the more genuine your example would be, the better your chances to score this at least reasonably well in their job interviews, okay? Question number 12, how do you prioritize? Okay, so tell me about a gut-wrenching prioritization. Okay, notice how do you prioritize is an open-ended question, and tell me about a gut-wrenching prioritization is the same question framed behaviorally. So long story short, if I ask you how do you prioritize, you should pitch me with a specific example. Okay, so remember this trick because it's super important. Which principle do you think this could apply to? It's bias for action. Okay, so how do you prioritize? And some levels of success, if you want to give great answers to prioritizations, would be to frame them in the STAR format, keep it to the point with some metrics even, and try to find frameworks, prioritization frameworks. The Kano customer satisfaction model, I don't know, it would be for more IT roles, but accountants would have different frameworks. You know, try to use frameworks to showcase your ability to prioritize in a context of bias for action as being the leadership principle. Okay, question number 13. Tell me about the time when you had to commit to a group's decision. Okay, so when you had to commit to a group's decision. This is a trick question. Okay, this is on the leadership principle of have backbone, disagree, and commit. And commit is the second part that we're interested in when you committed to a group decision. Right now, what you want to avoid here would be to speak about the scenario where you committed to a group's decision and it turned out to be a bad decision. So you said, haha, I got you, you know, like you see, I was right, but I committed because I had to commit. This won't sell you as a great candidate in a job interview with any company, right? So instead, you should choose an example, a genuine example where the other party was right and you committed and it was a success. Okay, so this is the best way to pitch it from experience, and you'll see it's never as simple as that, so to speak, but think of it this way: is the second scenario in have backbone, disagree, and commit. Okay, so that's what it hopefully makes more sense. And question number 14, last but not least, how do you show customer obsession? Okay, so you might think that Blue Origin being a highly technical environment, they're not highlighting they're not highlighting this type of customer obsession, but if you remember in the beginning of this list, I talked repeatedly about high standards. Okay, so high standards usually go also with customer obsession. So this is why you'd want to think about who your customers are in the type of role that you're doing. You know, a scientist will have different types of customers to that of an accountant. Okay, customers could be primarily internal with Blue Origin, or you know, who knows, maybe you work also with some external customers there, maybe some contractors, maybe. But long story short, take a deep dive to find out who your customer is, and be prepared to showcase your high standards overall in whatever work that you're doing. Right. So as you can see here, it's all about understanding why questions get asked and preparing, you know, a story bank for the purpose of a job interview, especially if you're applying for more senior types of roles, especially if your interest is also to negotiate a better offer. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.